Does anything prepare you to make decisions about the death of a parent? I don't know. Not even decades in bioethics. Many issues in bioethics unexpectedly hit me personally, as I'll explain in some of these stories. The death of my father was one of them. This is Great Stories in Bioethics, my personal YouTube channel, and I'm Gregory Pence. So, on a cold, dark night in December of 2000, my brother Bob called me from Wheaton, Maryland. I was in Birmingham, Alabama, and he said, "Dad's not doing too well. If you want to see him again, you better fly up here." And I thought, my father, who was about 89, maybe he's weathered many crises before, and he's always pulled through. He was tough. He doesn't want to die. Maybe not. My father had a good career. He and my mother moved from Woodstock, Virginia to Washington, D.C., graduated as a lawyer, and worked for the trademark office as an examiner for decades, 30 years, and raised with my mother 5 children in Claremont and Wheaton, Maryland, suburb of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, just the last stop on the Red Metro line. And as a child, 7-year-old, and later, I remember many evenings when other fathers were out playing softball or bowling. My father would be sitting in his armchair in the living room reading Will Durant or Heidegger or Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death or Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. My father was kind of obsessed about death. I don't know if it helped him. I can almost imagine a smiling figure of death, a sigh hanging over him, kind of smiling like, "You can't avoid me." It's probably true that philosophy helped him some. After all, Socrates tells us that philosophy should prepare us for death and to die well, and he died well drinking hemlock. It's also true that my father reading all those philosophy books and thinking about death probably had something to do with taking my very first course at William & Mary was in philosophy, where I fell under the spell of a father-like figure, Frank McDonald, ended up having a career in philosophy. You think that might have had something to do with it? So in 2000, after 50 years of reading and study, I was looking forward to talking to my father about death and how he was preparing, maybe getting some wisdom from him. But my father's dying did give me some wisdom about dying, but none of the sort I expected. So another man, also as my father and Frank McDonald, very important in my life, and also kind of a fatherly figure, was James Rachels. And James Rachels in 1975, as I explained in the second episode in the series, wrote one of the most famous articles in bioethics, maybe philosophy, called Active and Passive Euthanasia. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the first philosophy article ever published in such a journal, especially the most prestigious medical journal in the world. It so much impressed medical dean Gene Pittman that he was very much in favor of me helping him recruit Jim to be the philosophy chair at UAB, which we did. And in that article, as I explained before, Jim took basically the essence of 2 kinds of ethical theories, the ontology that emphasized motives and consequentialism that emphasizes results, and said, if a doctor is omitting treatment with the intention of death, and if the result of omitting is death, and if this is true, whether he withholds or whether he does something active, then ethically, on those 2 criteria, there is really no difference between active and passive euthanasia, or what's today called the acting and omitting distinction. And indeed, Jim argued, sometimes withholding actually leads to more suffering. We certainly feel that way about our pets and animals. So I thought that was a great point, and I believed it to be true, but logically, there was no difference between the 2. But I certainly oversimplify because not all bioethicists thought that way. And Jim's articles spawned a huge literature of commentary, many articles and master's theses. One night that all changed when Dr. Patel called me from the Hebrew National Home, which was in Bethesda, Rockville, Maryland, where my father had gone for long-term care. And he said my father's condition had worsened and maybe I should talk to him. So I tried to talk to him some on the phone, and he said he wasn't ready to die. He couldn't die. He thought he might get better. And then he kind of fell asleep, as Dr. Patel had predicted. Very soon after, Dr. Patel called me back and said it was time either put in a feeding tube or not put in the feeding tube. I reflexively said, oh yeah, put in the feeding tube. I didn't want my father to die. He didn't want to die. About an hour after I made that decision, a nurse called me and said, aren't you the medical ethicist? Are you sure you want to put in a feeding tube for your father? You know what you're doing, what that means for your family? And then I thought, well, of course, I had forgotten that the issue is no longer abstract, but now it's the imminent death of my father. So I agonized that afternoon. I called my mother, my brothers and sisters. Because I was a bioethicist, my family had maybe mistakenly left the decision to me. That isn't always true. I know for Peter Singer that he doesn't always get to make the decisions about didn't get the decision about his mother because he had a sister. But anyway, I decided finally to not allow the feeding tube and to go right up to DC. I really got the first plane I could. I was at the airport and Dr. Patel called and he said my father had died. And my father died a hard death. He didn't want to die. He hadn't accepted his death. And my decision had right away led to his death. And at that moment in that airport, I was racked with guilt. I had made a decision that quickly resulted in the death of a man I loved, who I would never talk to again, who didn't want to die, whose consciousness had now ceased to exist. We would never talk again. In that moment, I learned why it's so hard for some physicians to remove care, why it's so much easier just to forego, and how it's so hard for families to make these decisions. Looking back, after talking it over with my wife, I know I made the right decision. I know that about 80% of deaths in America are the result of some similar decision. And as my wife Pat observed, perhaps my obsession about withdrawing the feeding tube had something to do with my over-intellectualizing the whole thing. I am a philosopher after all, but it also intellectualized my feelings of helplessness and desire for more conversations. So looking back, I also understand that, ethics is maybe half logic, but it's also, as Martha Nussbaum emphasizes, half feelings. And we want to have a place for feelings and ethics and bioethics. We don't want people to be so logical about the death of a family member. We want them to be reluctant to bring about death and to allow death. Those are good moral notions to have. And I also know that ending the life of one you love tears you apart, and nothing prepares you for it, not even decades of bioethics, and that you always want one more conversation with your dad. That's it for today. See you next Tuesday.